are live. People in the chat, if you can hear us, please give me a thumbs up. Excited about this one today. Going deep into Whitiko. I always feel like I should have a steel drum playing or something. Whitiko man. Okay, good. Thumbs up. Okay, we are on Unite, YouTube. Okay, I just got verification. We're good. I'm hearing, is that you, Bear?
Of course it is.
Okay. I'm gonna hit record and fire this bad boy up. Here we go. And boom, we're back for another episode of AlphaCast. I'm Mike Winter, and I'm here as always with the ensouled Dr. Bear Paul Lando, coming to you live and direct from the great state of Jefferson here on the beautiful azure waters of the Smith River. The water's up. We've been getting some rain. It seems like we skipped fall and went to winter for a bit, but it is warming up a little bit this weekend. Just so blessed to be here in this beautiful land we call the great state of Jefferson, where freedom still reigns supreme. And today we have a power-packed show for you. This is a guest that has been requested many, many times, so we're very happy to have Paul on today. And no real updates on my end. The platform we're very close to launching. That'll be on alphavedic.com. Bear Lando, any updates on your end from the farm before we have Paul come on?
No, let's get into it. We're busy moving into our newly built business center, and we'll be doing some podcasts from out there too. But let's go for it, Mike.
Awesome. Okay. Whitiko. Oh, and I want to just actually give a shout out to Sayer G. Thanks for the blast this morning out to your mailing list for the show. We are very happy to be on his platform, unite.live. Please, guys, if you're on YouTube, or as I call it, affectionately call it LooshTube, go check out unite.live. It's an alternative platform that Sayers put a lot of time and money into, and we're happy to be on there as a featured show. And then we're also on typically on Odyssey as well as a backup, and then LooshTube and Facebook. Okay, today Whitiko, mind
Mike,
virus.
Quick, I haven't. Sorry about that. I haven't talked to Sayer in a while, so let's get him back on. I'd like to have a chat with them online here.
Yes, Sayer is going to have me and Jason Crow do a live stream very soon on his platform. I think in a couple days. He wants to do it because of the massive fallout in crypto, and the markets are tanking, as I called, and Cordal, how Cordal has such a massive role to play because Cordal's not tied to the legacy system. So we'll be doing that with Sayer soon. But yes, I'd love to get Sayer on and get all his updates with everything he's been up to. I'll reach out to him, Bear. Thanks for reminding me. Awesome. Okay. Whitiko, mind virus or agent of change, is a stealth contagion affecting the realm of the collective subconscious. Author and teacher Paul Levy leads us on a journey through what the Native Americans referred to as Whitiko. Has a spell been cast upon the unsuspecting masses? Does the apparent mass-psychosis of an alleged sentient species suggest a stealth contagion, both insidious and pernicious? The concept is not new, and Native Americans went so far as to coin the term Whitiko to acknowledge the phenomenon. Quote, Whitiko is a cannibalizing force driven by insatiable greed, appetite without satisfaction, consumption as an end in itself, and war for its own sake against other tribes, species, and nature, and even against the individual's own humanity. Paul Levy has thoroughly dissected this issue with his two groundbreaking works, Whitiko, Healing the Mind Virus That Plagues Our World, and Dispelling Whitiko, Breaking the Curse of Evil. On this episode, Paul guides us on a journey of freedom through the portal of awareness. Paul attended State University of New York at Binghamton. Wow, SUNY. That's right, I was going to bring that up. My mom's from Binghamton. I grew up, Paul, in summers in Binghamton, and know that very well. While an undergraduate, he was hired by Princeton University to do research in economics. When he graduated college, he stopped his studies in economics and pursued his career in art, moving out to the Bay Area, where he was both making and teaching art. Quote, it is a disease of the soul, and being a disease of the soul, we all potentially have Whitiko, as it pervades and informs the underlying field of consciousness. Common to many trailblazers of the spirit, Paul had a life-changing spiritual awakening following an intense personal trauma in which he began to recognize the dreamlike nature of reality. In 1993, after many years of struggling to contain and integrate his non-ordinary experiences, Paul started to openly share his insights on how life is life is a shared waking dream that we all are co-creating and co-dreaming together. Amen to that. Whitiko induces in us a proclivity to see the source of our own pathology outside of ourselves, existing in the other. Whitiko feeds off of polarization and fear and terror of, quote, the other. As a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner for over 30 years, he has intimately studied with some of the greatest spiritual masters of Tibet and Burma and served as the coordinator of the Portland chamber of the Padma Sambhava Buddhist Center for over 20 years. Paul is the founder of the Awakening in the Dream community in Portland, Oregon. Paul is a very busy guy. Let's get right to it, Bear. This is going to be a fun one, a topic that we love to cover in pretty much every episode. We do.
Absolutely. In one way or the other. Paul, thanks so much for making time for us. And I didn't realize we live so close to each other up here in the Pacific Northwest. So we've got to get together sometime. But thank you. And I'm really looking forward to this chat because I appreciate your work greatly in that there's this always message of hope and self-determination, which is our philosophy here. And we've had a lot of guests on where we're talking about this concept of a mind virus that, some associate to a dark lord or the archons and interdimensionals, and technological overlays, and all of those, of course, have an ominous sort of undertone to them, and also kind of pessimistic to a lot of folks. So I agree with you that this is very purposeful. Wherever this is coming from, we'll let you explain to you what the concept of Whitiko means in contrast to that. But I think we always have a choice here, and that's the whole reason why we're playing the game. If we have time, I'd also like to get into the dreams, that I know you really cover thoroughly. I've always, with my clients, even tried to get them into lucid dreaming. And then, of course, the trick is to do the lucid dreaming while we're allegedly awake. And I think in nature, it's a little easier, which is why we live where we do, because nature seems to speak metaphorically with less filters than elsewhere. So, Paul, please take it where you'd like. If you want to maybe start with a little bit of your history, how your awakening happened, and then we can just follow your lead here. So thanks again.
Sure. Yeah, totally. No, I'm just so happy to be here with you guys. And so my how I came to my work, it was really one of a kind, I think, in that and I don't need to go into the whole story, but there was this incredible psychological trauma that I experienced at the hands of a psychopathic father. I'm the only child, and it just created enormous suffering to the point where I went from being a very highly functioning person to all of a sudden not being able to live my life. And it was clear to me I had to deal with what was happening. And I went inwards. I went into my own mind and assumed the position of the witness, because that was the only thing that really seemed to alleviate even the slightest bit the suffering, the overwhelming, over-the-top suffering that I was experiencing. And then, this is in 1981 in the Bay Area. I was doing so much just meditation, hours and hours a day, maybe about 4 hours on the average a day, and then studying, and my whole life was devoted to that. I had this spontaneous awakening. I got hit by a bolt of lightning, not from the sky, it ignited inside of my brain. And within the day, I began to realize, oh my God, this is a dream. And we're all co-dreaming it into materialization moment by moment, but we're not aware that we're doing that. And I was so ecstatic that it got me in deep trouble right away. I got pathologized, because from the normal point of view, it was like I had this radical personality change overnight, and I immediately got thrown in mental hospitals and diagnosed, oh, you're mentally ill and you're manic depressive. And the chemical imbalance theory had just been supposedly discovered the year before. And I knew, I mean, it was super clear to me that I wasn't mentally ill, that I was having a spiritual awakening. But during that next almost 2 years, I was just a free agent. So I wasn't, in a monastery or an ashram. And a handful of other times I got thrown in mental hospitals and diagnosed and medicated. And, at the time I was really pissed at myself for, wow, I really screwed this up. But over time, I began to realize, no, that was part of the awakening. That was sort of like my descent into the shamanic underworld of the unconscious. And so, I quickly extricated myself from psychiatry and, got off the medication really quick and continued my awakening and met my teachers. But then I was doubly traumatized from not only the abuse from my father, but then from the unbelievable abuse from psychiatry. And I began to realize that it was like my father had become taken over by some sort of higher dimensional, transpersonal, dark energy that was using him as his instrument and, to get into me. And then I began to recognize, wait, that same dark sort of evil energy that had taken over my father was informing and giving shape to the system of psychiatry. And then I began to realize, wait a second, like iterations of a fractal, that same deeper, darker, evil seeming sort of energy was playing out through the greater body politic of our species all over the planet. That's when I began to realize, wait a second, there's something whose source is within the human psyche that was informing sort of the non-local field in such a way to act itself out in this destructive way that was like actually the inspiration for evil and was creating this collective psychosis. And what I was beginning to realize, I didn't have the name for it then, but that's what the Native Americans call Whitiko. It's a mind virus. It's a collective psychosis whose source is within us, whose source is within the psyche. To the extent that any of us fall asleep and act out our unconscious at any moment, we all potentially have it. But then I began, really going down that rabbit hole, trying to understand what I had discovered. And I realized, oh my God, I'm just, translating what every spiritual tradition has been pointing at. And then I really connected with quantum physics and I wrote a book about that, but I began to realize that the revelations that are emerging from quantum physics are the actual medicine for the mind virus. And I could go on, I mean, it's my life's work, but basically what Whitiko does in essence, so in the apocryphal text, they talk about Whitiko, they call it the counterfeiting spirit. But of course, that got edited out of the canon of the Bible because Whitiko was on the editorial board. But it describes this counterfeiting spirit, and it's a word for word description of Whitiko. It puts us on. It's a master impersonator. It will imitate us, but in this limited version of ourselves. Oh, I'm traumatized. I'm wounded. I'm a victim of abuse. And if we're not awake at that moment and we identify with its image and version of ourselves, then it has us, then it can manipulate us and control us. But if we are in touch with our true nature, with who we actually are, it has no power over us at all. And it actually doesn't even exist. That's the mind fuck. There is no such thing as Whitiko, and yet it can destroy our species. So what I'm describing, if you think about it, so Whitiko, you see, it can't steal our soul, but it tricks us into giving our soul away. And then we give ourself away, we identify with who we're not, and we disconnect from our creative agency. That's a recipe for madness. That's Whitiko, because Whitiko has no creativity at all. It just impersonates us, but it plugs into our creativity and turns it against us. And that's why for us to connect with our creativity, because that's our nature. When we say, oh, we have to, to have this realization of ourself, well, what does that mean? Our true nature is by its very nature creative. And when we have the realization of who we are, we then become creative. We express ourselves creatively. And the more we express ourselves creatively, the more we know our nature in a positive feedback loop that creates light upon light. That's why the medicine for Whitiko is to connect with our creative spirit. So I'll stop there, but I can go on for hours about this.
No, that's great. So just a quick comment. So the real anecdote, of course, is awareness. And as far as a lot of the information that's circulating now, I think it's positive. But no matter what the source of this, whatever you attribute it to, it's still external and has no power unless we give it power. And I think that's what I hear you saying.
It's not even external, because external is investing it with the reality. There is no such thing, you know. So if people hear there's a mind virus and they'll be scared, no. There is no external objective mind virus at all, and it actually, you know, from one point of view, the mind virus feeds off of our fear. And the idea being is that you have the realization, no, when I'm in touch with my nature, you see, the way to really, you know, to whatever, engage with the evil in the world is not to fight it, because then we're unwittingly feeding it. The way to fight the evil that's playing out in the world is to get in touch with the part of us that's invulnerable to its effects. That's our true nature. And when you connect with that, then the idea that this mind virus or evil can have any influence on us, that just vaporizes, because we're into, you see, we have this unimaginably vast creative power. We all do 24/7, but we don't know we have it. And because we're unconscious of it, it then gets enacted unconsciously in a destructive way. And, you know, that's getting played out writ large on the global scale. And, you know, one very simple way of understanding that, say if somebody came to my office with a dream, and the dream they had was what's happening in the world, that these seemingly fascist totalitarian forces are taking over and, you know, and taking away our freedoms and you know, imposing mandates and passport, you know, all the stuff that's happening in the world. And they would, you know, say to me, wow, I had this dream, help me interpret it. And I would just, you know, I would try to reflect back to them, well, clearly that dream is an expression that you're not in touch with your power. And you've outsourced your power, and the powers that be are more than happy to pick it up and turn it against you. And so what the dream is showing that fictitious person, or all of us, because we're the dreamers, is that, yeah, this is reflecting, you see, Whitiko is this revelation. It's a living revelation. It's showing us something that we need to know. And what it's showing us is that, yeah, Whitiko is a dreamed up phenomena. It is expressing that we are not in touch with our nature, with our intrinsic creative agency and power. And to the extent that we're not, we're going to dream up a world in which we're colluding in destroying ourselves. You see, that's the key thing, to have the realization that, you know, there's no like evil force out there that can do anything to us without us being complicit in it. That's the place where we need to like bring awareness to realize in our day-to-day lives, how are we colluding, you know, with our own sort of being victimized. And there's no one else doing that to us. We're doing that. And this involves really fully accepting responsibility.
Brilliant. One quick question. Could you elaborate just a little bit more about the role of what we perceive as trauma, as far as stimulus to break through? Because I think we're
totally
experiencing a collective trauma right now, and therefore a collective awakening. So
totally. And I feel like I'm a world expert on trauma, because I've been like screaming for years how like deeply traumatized I've been from what I've gone through with my family and with psychiatry and just being in the world. Because we as a species are suffering from a form of collective trauma. Now, trauma is Whitiko, you know, trauma, having addictions, they're all sort of synonyms for Whitiko. And I'll explain how. So what happens in trauma, say there's a historical event that's overwhelming, we can't integrate it in a normal way, we can't symbolize it, so we split, we disassociate. Now that split off part of the psyche, it can develop a seeming autonomy on its own and a seeming independence. And in psychology speak, it's called an autonomous complex. The indigenous people would call that a demon, right? Okay. And now when we're in trauma, so then there's an overwhelming event, we split off. The way we try to heal from the trauma actually creates the very trauma we're trying to heal from in a self-reinforcing feedback loop, and whose origin is within our own minds. And that's the compulsion to repeat. So in other words, to the extent that I'm in trauma, I'm gonna unconsciously dream up scenarios in my life to reenact the very trauma. So the thing about Whitiko and the thing about trauma, they're quantum phenomena. And what I mean by quantum phenomena, just like what is the nature of light? Well, it's a wave or a particle, depending on how it's observed. In a superposition of states encoded within Whitiko, within trauma is a pathology in which it's just like a black hole that consumes our energy, in which we're destroying ourselves. And yet, hidden within, encoded within the acting out of trauma, is the solution. We're trying to consciously re-experience something. We're trying to discharge something that's locked up and feeding the compulsion to re-traumatize ourselves. So that's the quantum nature of trauma, that it's both the pathology and the vaccine and the medicine encoded in a superposition of states. That's just like Whitiko. Whitiko is the source of the greatest evil. It's the inspiration for the collective madness. And if we don't come to terms with what it's showing us, it will kill us. And yet it is the greatest medicine we could ever imagine. It's actually helping us to awaken. It's the greatest catalyst for the evolution of our species that we've ever known. But if we don't recognize what it's revealing to us, it will kill us. That's why I'm continually trying to point out the importance of having the recognition that what's happening in our world is a revelation, that Whitiko, this mind virus, is a revelation. And when we actually take on board inside of our minds what it's revealing to us, it will connect us with this infinite creative spirit that is our nature. And then when we connect with other people who are also having the realization of the nature of our situation, that we're having a collective dream, and that this waking dream is manifesting the way it is because we're dreaming it to manifest that way, because we're unconscious of who we are and of our creative agency. When we connect with other people who realize that, we can change the dream. That's the waking dream. That's what this is about. We can consciously participate in our evolution. That's what all of this is about. And the way to understand this is through the imagination. If you imagine being in a night dream, and you're in a night dream, and then you have this lucid dream, and you have this lucidity, and you connect with other dream characters, parts of yourself who are also lucid, and you hang out together, and you trip out on, what are we realizing? We're realizing that this universe we're in, it's a function of our collective dreaming. And what you discover, I imagine, is that you can get in phase with each other and get in sync with each other and change the dream. And that's the example is a night dream, but that's what's available to us in the waking dream. That's what all of this is about. And that's what my whole work is about.
So it's up to us to basically imagine a new reality together. Can you maybe just go a little deeper as far as how a practice of lucid dreaming would facilitate that sort of insight that can carry over to our so-called waking self?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I want to bring in, because the final chapter in my quantum physics book is about becoming, having these lucid dreams, and the profundity of that idea and that experience of being able to lucidly dream. So I want to just springboard by starting to talk about quantum physics, because quantum physics is widely considered the greatest discovery ever in all of history in the realm of science. There's no debate about that. But it's very controversial about what does it mean. So here, quantum physics came along into our world and into our minds beginning 1900s. And it basically empirically proved that the universe that the pre-quantum physicists, the classical Newtonian physicists, were studying, i.e. an objective world, didn't exist. There was no such thing as an objective world. in the sense that quantum physics, in essence, discovered that the act of observing the world actually influenced the world observed. It was one quantum system with no separate parts interacting. But in other words, that the act of observation is creative. We're not just passively observing this universe. We are at the same moment, we are creating it while we're being created by it, you know? And that's the realization that quantum physics is offering us. And when you discover that there's nothing objective out there separate from you, that your act of observing it is actually influencing the universe observed, then what you discover, wait, if there's nothing objective, then what happens to the subject? Who am I? I, as a subject, need an object to be a subject in relationship to in order to be a subject. But if there's no object, then who am I? See, quantum physics is promoting itself to become a spiritual path. So the idea is, just like in a night dream, we can recognize the nature of our situation, i.e. that we're dreaming, and then we're just not passively observing and being, in a victimized state by what's happening and being conditioned by it. No, we're actually in touch with the empowered part of ourselves that's actually co-creators of our experience. We are, you see, quantum physics has shown again and again that we are creating our experience moment by moment of ourselves and of the world. There's no one doing that to us. We're doing that. By the way we interpret what's happening to us and place meaning on it, we are actually creating our experience. And so to have that realization is like, oh, that, when I have a lucid dream at night, and, which I've been having for decades, well, this is the dream that, like you were saying in your intro, this is the dream we can actually have lucidity and become lucid in and connect with other people who are also connecting with their lucid true nature. And like I'm saying, we can connect with each other, as these lucid dreamers and create this non-local field that can actually attract other people who are open into the lucid dream that we're having, in which we're all in service to the whole. Because when you realize this is the lucid dream, what happens? You snap out of the identification, of the imagination, of thinking you exist as a separate self. And you realize, oh my God, we're interdependent. We're interconnected. We're all parts of each other. And the energetic expression of that is compassion. And that compassion, that's the Whitiko dissolver par excellence.
So quantum physics to me seems simply going full circle back to what we used to know. You have the Aboriginals in Australia that talked about the dream time and, really considered what we consider waking as the dream. We have the alchemist who understood all these principles through Hermetic science. And now we're doing different terminologies as far as waveform mechanics and so forth, which I think is great, but it's apparent that we go through cycles. We're cycling back. So what do you see as far as this new cycle that we're opening into? Where are we going with this now?
Sure. Well, I just want to say what you're saying is so right on, in that, what the quantum physicists, what the alchemists, what the indigenous people, it's exactly what the Buddha realized. It's the Buddha nature. It's what Christ was bringing forth. And, in essence, you see, there's no time to waste, because we are unconsciously, sort of creating collective suicide, and we're destroying the biosphere, the life support system of the planet. And in essence, what I'm pointing at, and and I'm just a translator, I'm not the only person saying this, I'm just translating what every wisdom tradition has been saying. What I'm pointing at is that we as a species have fallen under a spell. We have hypnotized ourselves. And if I can give an example that might shed light on what exactly I mean, and to invoke the imagination again, to step into a dream. Imagine being in a night dream, and imagine you're holding a viewpoint in the night dream. Okay. And what is a dream? A dream is a reflection of the mind. Okay. So as soon as I hold a viewpoint in the night dream has no choice but to spontaneously, instantaneously reflect back the very perspective I'm holding, because the dream is nothing other than a projection of the mind. So if I'm holding that viewpoint, now I have evidence. I have evidence because of the way the dream is manifesting, confirming to me the seeming objective truth of that viewpoint. So I become even more fixed in my viewpoint. And the more fixed in my viewpoint I become, the more the dream just instantaneously gives me evidence confirming the objective truth of my viewpoint ad infinitum. It's a self-reinforcing feedback loop whose origin is my own mind. And so what am I describing? I've actually enchanted myself, put myself under a trance. I've, hypnotized myself via my own creative genius and how I create reality. But I've done it in a way that's killing me, that's creating a cocoon, that's suffocating me. And that's the nature of our situation. That's what's actually being revealed to us. And I'm pointing at, we're at a time in history where there's this, we're being sort of invited to really shed light on this process, on our creative genius, because in a sense we are these geniuses. We're these creative geniuses. I mean, that's what Christ was saying in the Bible. Ye are gods. This is what he's pointing at. And in the Bible, by the way, they talk about, and in Gnosticism, they talk about it, this mysterious mind blindness, and that we have eyes, but we don't see, and they correlate not seeing to a closed heart, and I mean, it's describing Whitiko, like the Hawaiian kahuna describes it, Islam describes it, Buddhism, Christianity, and here comes quantum physics. Now, I point out that quantum physics, you see, I'm a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner, and in the actual tradition that I do practice to, the particular sort of this lineage, it's actually inspired by what's called terma, and terma translates as the hidden treasures. So in other words, the idea being that there are these hidden treasures that are encoded in the multidimensional fabric of our universe, in the earth, in the sky, in water, in our minds, that right at the exact moment they're needed, these hidden treasures, which could be in the form of a blessed object or a teaching or a prayer or an insight, will all of a sudden be discovered by the person who's destined to discover them, not a moment before, not by somebody else, right at the moment that they're needed to keep the lineage fresh, in case the community of practitioners gets one-sided and they get sort of stale in their practice. All of a sudden, these terma, which are a group dreaming process, the community dreams up the terma at exactly the right moment to manifest in their waking dream to help them to reconnect. It's exactly like having a dream. And if the dreamer becomes sort of one-sided, what happens? The unconscious compensates and sends them a symbol. Now, remember, quantum physics is a symbolic procedure. Symbols are the language of dreaming. Okay, so why I'm talking about terma is that I point out in my work that quantum physics is, I don't want to sort of do appropriation to Tibetan Buddhism, but I'm pointing out that quantum physics is a modern day analog to a terma, that we have dreamed up quantum physics. It's not an accident that we've dreamed it up right at the same time that art was going from, just sort of like kind of trying to reproduce the visual world to actually being non-objective, to all of a sudden when psychology was, discovering the infinite world of the unconscious that's informing our world. Right at that moment that quantum physics was discovering, what that quantum physics was coming into the world and into our minds and showing us our incredible, creative power, that it's a terma. It's a modern day analog to a terma. And the thing about a terma is when it's brought into the world, typically there are obscuring forces that try to stop it. It's very much related to individually when any of us get closer to the light of our nature, there are typically these sort of negative forces that try to stop it, resistance or whatever. And instead of that being a mistake, no, that's showing that you're on the right path. And I've learned that. I have every day when I write in my work, I feel this incredible sort of, negative forces trying to stop me. And I've learned, oh, that's the best news ever. That's showing me I'm on the right path instead of getting filled with despair. So when a terma actually is brought into this world, there's typically obscuring forces, that are trying to obscure it, to keep it down, and that's very much like with quantum physics. The typical classical physicists are just, they're like, no, that's crazy. We can't talk about consciousness. But quantum physics is basically discovered that this is a collective dream. That's the essence of quantum physics. That, the whole controversy, what does it mean? That's what it means. And that's what my book is pointing out. And the other part about the terma, the hidden treasure, is that when somebody discovers it, and I'm not any sort of person I'm just like a translator saying, hey, look, other people have discovered this hidden treasure that is unbelievably, this gift to all of humanity. When somebody discovers it, typically they have to do the practice of whatever the terma is offering until they actually have the realization, and then they're able to transmit it to the world, to other people, because termas, hidden treasures, are meant to be shared. Okay. And what I'm pointing out is that, whether it's quantum physics or there are a lot of other, articulations of the same realization, like you've been saying, this is the medicine, this is the vaccine that encoded in the evil, in the madness that's playing out, it's actually helping us to wake up. It's catalyzing us into lucidity. But it's a participatory medicine, just like quantum physics is saying this is a world that's participatory. It's not just separate, it's not external, it's not a passive thing we watch. No, we're actually participating in the evocation and the creation of the world, that we have to take within ourselves what quantum physics or these other wisdom traditions are revealing to us. And then we actually become empowered agents who can actually transmit what we're realizing to others. And then that realization goes viral, and can inflame like an undreamed of, up until this moment, global awakening.
And these analog metaphors that keep recycling, they also have to be, of course, be culturally relevant and provide a transition out of the dream, within the context that we're presently operating. For instance, we have been brought into this reductionist kind of science and really believers in those concepts. So waveform mechanics and quantum physics, or however you want to do it, is going to be more appealing metaphorically than just maybe the Native Americans that say, well, this is what's going on because a certain animal just crossed your path, and they can just sort of see it within the context of nature. We pride ourselves, I think, in being technological. So right. That's, what's relevant to us now. So what would, you have an interesting background. You have Buddhism, you have Carl Jung, you have, kind of a interesting mix of background that you have. So how would you jive the two? What would Carl Jung say about all of this?
Well, what Carl Jung, and I want to just point out, I mean, if I didn't find his work, I wouldn't have made it. He saved my life, because when I was having these out of the ordinary experiences, then I came across his work, synchronicity led me to him. And I realized, oh my God, he's articulating the same, thing that I had, I was experiencing, but didn't have a context for. Now, the thing with Jung, he was very much into quantum physics. I mean, his idea of synchronicity was the psychological analog, to quantum physics. And he actually collaborated with the Wolfgang Pauli, the Nobel Prize winning physicist, in articulating his notion of synchronicity. Because what is synchronicity? But it's where an inner state all of a sudden gets expressed through the outer world, as if there is a correlation between the inner and the outer. And that's what a dream is. When you're in a dream, you realize the inner is nothing other than an unmediated expression of that the outer and the inner are reflecting each other. They're expressing each other. They're not separate. So he would totally be on board with everything I'm saying. And I'm just continually bringing in Jung in my books and, paying all this money for the intellectual rights, but I don't care, because he was so switched on to this. And he was a modern day alchemist and a Gnostic. And he, if people don't study Jung, I mean, please, if you get anything from this interview or from my work, to really study Jung. He was one of the greatest geniuses in my mind, at least in my imagination, of all time. And he was tracking Whitiko. And I point out in my work, he didn't have the name Whitiko. He called it by a number of different names, but he was sensing this non-local evil and that exists within the psyche that informs collective events. And he called it totalitarian psychosis. Now, I just want to take a step back. One of the things that's so amazing about this mind virus, it's an inner disease of the soul that actually explicates itself through the medium of the outside world, synchronistically, right? So when anyone is afflicted by it, and we all potentially have it at each and every moment, to think, oh, they have Whitiko and I don't, that's a perspective that feeds Whitiko. But to actually have the recognition that it's an inner disease of the soul that you actually can track as it's reflecting and expressing itself via the outside world. Just think about what that means for a second. So if we have this totalitarian psychosis, Whitiko, it colonizes our mind. It sets up a shadow government in our psyche. It dictates to the ego. It subsumes all of the healthy parts of the psyche into serving its nefarious agenda. What I'm describing, that is how it plays out, where then we actually become taken over by the Whitiko virus, and it's doing it through our blind spots because it's a form of blindness. You see, that's the key thing. Whitiko is a form of blindness that thinks it's sighted. And not only does it think it's sighted, it thinks it's more sighted than people who actually see. So that's the affliction, the mental affliction that is, really current in our day, is our species has fallen into a form of mind blindness. Okay, now getting back to that totalitarian psychosis, it takes over the psyche. The person who's afflicted literally becomes taken over. They become possessed. They're oblivious to that. They become an instrument for Whitiko to incarnate in our world. Well, what I'm describing in an individual, that process, that microcosmic process that happens in an individual psyche is playing out through the greater body politic of the world. Think about what's happening. Totalitarian forces are creeping all over the planet. They're trying to centralize power and control. They're taking away our freedoms, but it's a hybrid form of totalitarianism, just like a virus mutates, okay? And now the thing about Whitiko, it's like a virus that mutates, but it's forcing us to mutate. In other words, it's forcing us to evolve or it'll kill us. But that inner disease of Whitiko, the totalitarian psychosis, is actually getting played out and reflecting back to us what's happening in our world. And through the fascist forces that are taking over, through the whole propaganda and mind control and brainwashing that's happening. And that's why I'm saying when you see that and you recognize that's reflecting how Whitiko works within our psyches, that's when you begin to recognize the dreamlike nature. Because the dreamlike nature, what that means is you recognize, exactly like a dream, that the inner and outer are reflections of each other, that we are living within our psyche. Our psyche doesn't exist inside of our skull. No, we are living inside of our minds. That's to have lucidity. And that's to become a lucid dreamer in our life. And when you connect with other people who are realizing that, you can actually, it's what I call conspire to co-inspire. That's a true conspiracy theory. You can dream each other awake. You can activate the collective genius where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And that's where we can actually intervene in the dreaming and make a difference in this collective madness in a way that's actually going to heal us.
Yeah, it's interesting. What we're really talking about here is the science of thought, right? And how this collective dream, which is an individualization of our own subconscious and our own past lives and all of the repercussions of every thought we've ever made. And because we live in this material time where we're just looking at the externalization of the end effect of these thoughts, we get lost in the mired in the mire of the Maya, instead of realizing we are the powerful source of the literal thing that's enslaving us. And so when we can go back to that, then in understanding how we generate those thoughts to begin with, and getting out of the victimhood and getting into, which is what the idea of like war against the evil is, instead of understanding it's just about healing, it's about grace, it's right about forgiving each other, then I believe that's where the true alchemy of the heart plays in. Paul, do you agree that we are sort of, are you positive? Are you an optimist about seeing that people are waking up to this and are starting to understand the true nature of thought and how our spirituality plays into that, related to the science of the day, even showing that through the quantum realm?
What you're saying, I just 100%, I totally agree with. Like, particularly you were saying about the power of thoughts, the power of our mind. I mean, that's what quantum physics is pointing at, is that quantum physics is saying this universe is like one big idea, one big thought. It's not separate from consciousness at all. And, in Tibetan Buddhism, for example, there's, the sayings of the Buddha. And in this book, they say the very first thing they reference, the Buddha says, we create this universe with our thoughts. Okay, so it's exactly what you're saying. And then to answer your question, about do I feel hopeful? Well, I point out, that by the power of our mind, if you see, we have overwhelming evidence of how horrible things are, and we're doomed and we're destroying ourselves and the evil, and so many people are filled with despair and depression and pessimism. And I point out that if you get caught by that, then you're part of the problem, because then by the power of dreaming, you're going to create more evidence confirming your pessimism. And but I point out that if you're overly optimistic, thinking, oh, well, God will save us or whatever, no, that's also to be off balance, because we actually have the power. Yeah, we depend on, higher intelligence, but we actually have the power within us to get into alignment and to connect with that creative source of that higher intelligence. And then I bring in quantum physics now, and I think this will be really hopefully inspiring, because quantum physics was trying to discover, and how come I keep on talking about quantum physics? It's the medicine for Whitiko, and it unlocks, think about quantum physics unlocked, the power of the atom. That's a pale reflection of the power of the psyche. That because the true ramifications of quantum physics are going to be found within our mind. It's going to change the way we think. That's what all the founding fathers were realizing. And so quantum physics was trying to understand, what is the microstructure of this universe? What are the building blocks that this physical world is made out of? And then as it kept on going down into smaller scales, it didn't find anything physical. It just found consciousness. And it found these things called elementary particles. Those are the most, the real, you can't get any smaller than that. And they discovered that these elementary particles existed in a state of potentiality, where each and every possible state they could ever exist in, they existed in this state of potentiality up until the moment that we observe them. And then we observe this elementary particle, and it actualizes into a particular manifestation. All the other potentialities, they vaporize into like parallel worlds as if they never existed. And that moment is happening, that experience is happening each and every moment. But what that means is that even if something is, and this is a quote of a quantum physicist, one of the founding fathers, highly ridiculously unlikely, it could still manifest this very next moment. So to bring it back to more empirical nature, the fact that our species could reach a critical point, like the 100th monkey phenomena, and we could actually awaken and avert the impending catastrophe that we actually are creating, because the blindness of Whitiko, it's a self-induced blindness. We are closing our own eyes. That's why, the idea I'm trying to point out, all we have to do to see is open our eyes and look. That's the solution, but to the extent we turn away and we turn a blind eye, not only are we feeding Whitiko, that is Whitiko. So the point is, even something as improbable, seemingly on the surface, as our species awakening, that actually, according to quantum physics, is completely and totally within the realm of possibility. And if we're not imagining that, then we're hooked by Whitiko. And then what in the world are we thinking? Then we're part of the problem, not the solution.
So quantumly speaking, are you suggesting that maybe these are in these subparticle levels like seeds waiting to be activated by the perceivers?
Yeah, well, the thing, these
Mm-hmm.
seeds waiting to be activated by the perceivers, I immediately associate, when you said that, to these hidden treasures, that this universe is filled with these hidden treasures. And think of the hidden treasures not just physically, but psychically, spiritually. And when we have open eyes to see, like, for example, if all of a sudden somebody has these experiences of the synchronistic matrix that's informing the seemingly physical world, and they experience it sufficiently to realize, to open their mind to that, all of a sudden, wow, there is this thing called the synchronicity. The more they hold that viewpoint, the more of the universe will manifest synchronistically, because the universe, being a dream, is nothing other than a reflection of their mind. Like another example, if we all of a sudden, I mean, just the idea that there's a thing called terma and hidden treasures, and this isn't a fairy tale. I mean, the greatest scholars in the world are studying this. This is showing us something. This world, when you actually take in to your mind that there is a thing called hidden treasures, and it's a real phenomena, and you're open to that, these hidden treasures are enfolded all throughout the multidimensional fabric of the universe, and you're even open to that, well, guess what? That makes it more likely that you will encounter hidden treasures that will then just self-reinforce your point of view that that's possible. So the point is, we have become so entranced, by our programming, by the mainstream, by ourselves, to think of our capability as like almost like in the little tip of our pinky finger. And you see, what I'm basically saying, the solution to the world crisis, it's already been discovered. And not only that, we have it, we possess it. And even more than that, we are it. That's what this is all about, is for us to remember, to unforget, instead of having this amnesia, to have an amnesia. It's an unforgetting, it's a remembering of who we are, that we actually are these, we're interconnected with each other, and we have this enormous power. We are interfacing with the creative source of the universe, and we are that. And so what I'm basically saying, this is the good news of the Bible. And this got me in huge trouble. When I had this realization in 1981, I was so enthusiastic, and that word, enthusiastic, and theos means to be filled with spirit, that I freaked out. The anti-bliss patrol is what I called it, like the mainstream consensus reality gatekeepers, and they couldn't have somebody so ecstatic. And they, of course, they medicated me and pathologized me and all that. But what I'm basically pointing at is the good news. This is the good news of the Bible. And, and particularly when any individual has this realization, here's the image in the collected works. Jung uses the image of when you have like a grain of sugar, and you have a glass of water, and you just dissolve the grain of sugar in the water, and it'll dissolve, and you put another grain, it dissolves and dissolves, and then it reaches a saturation point, and you put one more grain of sugar in that saturated solution, and a crystal will manifest. He says that's the way symbols manifest in the unconscious. And any one of us having this realization, whether you call it, seeing Whitiko, or, taking in the revelations of quantum physics, or seeing the dream, or owning our shadow, or waking up, however you describe it, it's the same idea. Any one of us having that realization could be the grain could be the grain of sugar that creates a global awakening in the collective unconscious of our species. And that's an incredibly hopeful vision. And not only is it a vision, it's true.
The 100th monkey, and what you just described can be actually demonstrated in a chemical lab, which is nice to be able to ground it in with things you can actually observe.
Yeah, for sure. No, totally. And so there's no need for despair. And and that's where, like, I would have been in deep trouble if I didn't, because I had my whole universe, all the psychiatrists, my family, my relatives, my friends, everybody was reflecting back to me, well, wow, Paul, you're mentally ill and you're in denial of your illness. And I'm just thinking, wow, they're like really stupid. They just have no idea, what they're talking about. And what saved me was that I was having these overwhelmingly clear experiences of the dreamlike nature, that stuff was happening in my life that was physically impossible, not just synchronicities, but like that could only happen in a dream, and it was like I'd had a quantum jump where all of a sudden I was living in the consensus reality where certain things were possible and certain things were impossible. And all of a sudden I had this quantum leap and I was living in a new universe where the realm of possibility had expanded to practically infinite degrees. And it was really destabilizing. I didn't have any context for it, but then over the course of, it's been, over 40 years, I'm more and more having the realization that I was having a revelation, and that this is a revelation that actually is helpful for people. And a lot of us are having similar revelations. I'm just an ordinary person who's dealing with my own stuff and my own trauma. I'm not any enlightened person, but I'm realizing, wow, just in my creative work, there's a way of me and of you and of each of us creatively articulating what's going on in us. It's like what Christ was saying in the apocryphal text. If you bring forth what's within you, it'll save you. If you don't bring forth what's within you, it'll destroy you. Well, like I would have been in deep trouble if for whatever reason I wasn't able to access my creative voice. It's the medicine for me. If I don't have time on a given day to get creative, I can't even imagine, but then I don't feel well, and it's like, you see, because we're all these wounded healers. That's an important point. And a wounded healer is related to the shaman, and I point out in my work, in my next book, and I have a third book coming out on Whitiko, coming out in the spring, because it's such a profound, like topic, that the shamanic archetype is the major archetype that's activated in the collective unconscious, of our species. Now think about what happens in the shamanic archetype. Somebody gets traumatized, they get wounded, right? They split, like we were talking about before. And that state of being disassociated constellates the shamanic archetype. What does that mean? Well, the shaman, they go in search of the part of them that's gotten traumatized, and that's the shamanic journey. And then they find the part that's imprisoned back in the amber of time in trauma, and they bring it back. And, I talk a lot about this in my next book, but the point is that the shaman necessarily, once they get called to be a shaman, if they don't assent and they say, no, I can't do that, that's when they fall ill. That's when they can go really crazy and even die. But if you assent to that calling, well, the same sponsor of the calling is the same sponsor that will send you everything you need to bring that calling to fruition. But it invariably involves a descent into the underworld, into the darkness, where you go through a death, birth, like rebirth experience. We as a species are going through the death, sort of birth experience. And then what does a shaman do? A shaman, I'm only a shaman in my wildest dreams. I'm just saying the shamanic archetype has been activated in me and in all of us, for a long time. But what does a shaman do? They take on the illness of the person that they're working with or the community. Taking on has a double meaning. It means take within themselves, and also having it out with. But they take on the illness such that they fall ill themselves. That's the key point. Okay. So many of us are suffering and feeling crazy or feeling out of sorts. We are like shamans who've ingested the collective madness. The danger is to stay stuck in that and to identify with that. That's tragic. But the shamanic archetype, what it means is that you actually somehow are able to creatively metabolize that in a way where it even more deeply connects you with the wholeness of your nature, of the self, of who you actually are. And by doing that, you found your way back to yourself in an even deeper way, in a non-local energetic way. That vibration becomes available to the person you're working with, to the community, and to the world. And we are all shamans in training. We're all these wounded healers. And the wounded healer has to do with, they have an incurable wound. I mean, I feel this incredible wound and trauma that I'm carrying 24/7, but instead of just cursing it and feeling victimized by it, I've been able to carry it in a way where it becomes the portal to my creative gifts. Because then the shaman, they bring back, when they come back to the world, they have these gifts that they received as a result of their initiatory ordeal. All of us are wounded healers in training. We're shamans in training. We're alchemists in training. You know, however you want, we're bodhisattvas in training. I mean, the bodhisattva, the word means a being in the process of awakening. Who among us is not a fledgling bodhisattva? You know, and the idea is if I help to support, you know, someone else in their role as bodhisattva or shaman or alchemist or wounded healer, I get as much benefit as they do, because we're not separate. You see, Whitiko, it's really a disease of the separate self. When we imagine that we exist separately, and then we invest our psychic energy on protecting this separate self that we imagine we are, that doesn't even exist. And that all of a sudden our energy is getting vampirically drained, because Whitiko is like a vampire. But think about what we're doing. We're investing all of our life force in defending an illusion. And it's so mind-blowing. And so that's where Whitiko, it's a disease of the separate self. And when you have lucidity, you see through the illusion of the separate self, and you actually connect with the true self, in which we're all dream characters in each other's dreams, embodied reflective aspects of each other. We're not separate. And out of that realization comes compassion. And that's the elixir that dissolves Whitiko.
Brilliant. This has been a most welcome discussion, and thank you so much. I know you have an hour for us today. I could talk to you forever. Would we like to maybe just have you tell us where we can find your work? I, for one, I haven't read your books yet. I will be very soon, though, you know, just inspired by your discussion today. So maybe tell us where we can find your work, and any
Sure.
other parting words.
Yeah, for sure. So if people, because this whole point that the way to see Whitiko and dispel Whitiko is to awaken in the dream. That's really what it is. And if you want to awaken in the dream, go to awakeninthedream.com. Okay, that's my website. There's a ton of articles. They're all for free. Yeah, you know, if you want to buy my books, you can do that. But there's also a ton of interviews just like this. It's all for free. I just wanted to get this information out because it's really helpful and it's medicine for people. And yeah, and I just have a new book that came out, you know, in December on Whitiko. Then there's Dispelling Whitiko that came out in 2013. That's selling more and more and more every month. You know, it's been out almost 10 years. Then there's the quantum book, and my new book will be out in May on Whitiko, the third of a trilogy. Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, and as far as parting words, you know, just the sense of, you know, there's no need at all. I mean, it's actually indulgent to get pessimistic. You know, there's, I think, a French saying, this is no time to get pessimistic. I'll save that for better times. And, you know,
So
and
true.
yeah, no, totally. And the idea being that this realization that I'm pointing out about seeing the dreamlike nature, seeing through the separate self, connecting with our creativity, it's contagious. It can go viral, you know, and, you know, we can turn each other onto it, but not in a way of convincing each other, but just by being it, by embodying it. You know, like in alchemy, they talk about finding the philosopher's stone, and they make the point, oh, the alchemist, the true alchemist, becomes this living philosophical stone. In the same way, a true follower of Christ becomes Christ, or a true follower of Buddha becomes Buddha. It's that same idea that we need to embody that state of just being in the moment, just being an embodiment as much as we're able of love and compassion, of forgiveness, and of being awake. And then we're actually transmitting to the universe. So, yeah. And I just want to thank you guys so much for the invitation to share my work.
Thanks so much, Paul. It's been such a blessing to have you. Everyone go to Awakening the Dream, awakeinthedream.com.
No, not Awake in the Dream. Awaken.
Yeah, it's in Awaken in the Dream. It's in the show notes below. The link's in the show notes below. So guys, just go click the link, go buy his books, go support him monetarily. That is very important in this day and age, Paul, that we support each other monetarily. So go support, because you put your effort out, and that's a way for us to support you through our efforts. That's the power of money. So go support Paul. Thanks so much, Paul, for being on with us today, man. We'd love to have you come back maybe after your next book drops, have you come back on the show next year. We'll set that up. And yeah, man, just keep the connection going. You're not that far from us, as Bear said. So when we're up in your neck of the woods, maybe we can look you up and have a cup of Joe. If you're
No, I would love that. I would definitely love that, to hang out. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Paul. Have a beautiful day.
Okay.
Cheers.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay.
Hey, and everybody, thanks so much for joining us today. We love you. And as always, please smash the thumbs up, share with your friends and family. It really helps get the content out there. And next week, I believe we have Jason Brashears coming back on, Bear, if I'm correct. So you guys, we're going to be yes, we have Archaics coming back on. We get your questions ready. It's going to be an open Q&A for Jason, who has really been rocking people's minds of late. So we'll see you next Thursday at normal time, 10 a.m. Pacific time. Remember to get outside, get your feet in the dirt, go plant something, go for a hike, ideally barefoot if you can. Mother Nature's our best teacher. She keeps us grounded, show her some love, and we'll see you next time. Love you guys. And remember, join us on Telegram, t.me/Alfa Vedic. You can find everything at alfavedic.com, ALFAVEDIC.com. Go get yourself some teas. Love you. See you next week. Bye-bye.